You're transported via the Central Line, then ejected, blinking in sudden daylight, at Marble Arch Tube Station. To your right, Oxford Street, a heaving mass of humanity, M&S carrier bags, hen parties, and, inevitably, someone eating a Greggs sausage roll at 9 in the morning. To your left, Marble Arch itself, marooned on its own little traffic island, because they moved it here from Buckingham Palace in 1851 and then built roads around it. Tour guides are always telling us to look up. Well, here's one time I want you to counter that advice. Look down. There's a second traffic island here, right at the junction of Edgware Road and Bayswater Road. Embedded in the pavement is a small circular plaque that 95% of the people streaming past you right now, well, they've never noticed it. It says, "The site of Tyburn Tree." Not a tree, a gallows. Now for the flip side of the record. Picture this. It's a Tuesday evening on a quiet lane in the middle of London's West End. Through the window of a tiny pub, you hear a piano. An actual piano, played by an actual man named Tony Fingers Pearson. He's been tickling these ivories at the Golden Eagle on Marylebone Lane since 1988. The crowd, tourists, locals, a couple of Harley Street surgeons, they're belting out Cole Porter. Beneath their feet, buried under centuries of cobblestones, concrete, and collective amnesia, a river is still flowing, the Tyburn. The lane? That's Marylebone Lane. It follows the Tyburn's ancient meandering course, a stubborn, curvy refusal to conform to the neat Georgian grid that was laid over it, like a tablecloth over a scratched old table. This is Marylebone, its story told through its pubs. It's one of execution and resurrection, body snatching and high society, muddy fields and marble halls. What? You expected Sherlock Holmes, didn't you? Well, your guidebook will cover the detective. We're going to be detective, as today, we decode Marylebone, the publicity way. I'm Expat Andy, broadcasting from Miami in the Sunshine State. You're listening to Publicity, the Travel Guidebook Gap. Let's walk as we talk. Act 1. When is a tree not a tree? We begin at that Marble Arch traffic island, not the most glamorous of starting points, especially as this particular traffic island at the junction of Edgware Road, Bayswater Road, and Oxford Street is where London got rid of its undesirables. The first recorded execution at Tyburn was in 1196, when William Fitz-Osbert was dragged here for stirring up a revolt of London's poor. In 1571, the site got its most infamous landmark, the Tyburn Tree, not a tree at all, but a triangular wooden gallows, consisting of 3 horizontal beams supported by 3 legs, nicknamed the Triple Tree, or the 3-legged mare, a gallows so efficient at keeping its clients moving that it claimed this odd design, this 3-sided structure allowing more bodies at any given execution, up to 24 people simultaneously. 3 oak trees planted in 2014 mark the triangular footprint of the gallows, arranged around a small stone roundel in the pavement. It's inscribed, "The site of Tyburn Tree." Most rush past without barely a glance. It's estimated that between 1196 and 1783, over 50,000 people were executed here. Execution days were public holidays. The condemned made their final journey from Newgate Prison in the city, a 3-mile ride through crowded streets. Hawkers sold food and drink. Wealthy spectators paid for grandstand seating. Mothers held their children's cheeks against the hands of the dead, believing it would cure disease. The phrase "one for the road" is said to derive from the condemned prisoner's last drink, served at a pub along the route from Newgate. Even the word hangover itself gets attributed, perhaps fancifully, to the boozy aftermath of execution spectacles. Among the more notable customers of the Triple Tree, Catholic martyrs like St. Edmund Campion, hanged, drawn, and quartered in 1581 during the English Reformation. Highwaymen like the dash-in Claude Duval, whose 1670 execution was supposedly mourned by a mass of weeping women. In one of history's stranger moments, the body of Oliver Cromwell was dug up from Westminster Abbey and hung at Tyburn in 1661 on orders of the restored monarchy. Death couldn't save you from a political grudge. The last person to swing at Tyburn was highwayman John Austin on 3rd of November 1783. After that, executions moved back inside Newgate Prison and the gallows came down. London was growing respectable. A few steps east of the traffic island, at 8 Hyde Park Place, stands the Tyburn Convent, a Benedictine monastery established in 1901 and dedicated to the memory of the 105 Catholic martyrs executed at Tyburn. The nuns maintain a small shrine in the basement where visitors can view relics from the martyrs' executions. Blood-stained linen, hair, even a fingernail. So how does London's most notorious killing ground become one of its most elegant neighborhoods? It starts with a river and a very strategic name change. Act 2, From Gallows Field to Gentleman's Grid. The story of Marylebone is the story of an identity crisis that worked out spectacularly well through a simple name change. Early branding, if you will. For centuries, this patch of London was just Tyburn, a collection of muddy fields, a small village, and very famous gallows. The name itself derives from the Tyburn River, a stream rising from springs on the slopes of Hampstead that flowed south through what would become Marylebone, Mayfair, and then under Buckingham Palace before emptying into the Thames at Pimlico. In the Domesday Book of 1086, the manor of Tyburn was recorded as containing barely 50 residents and valued at 52 shillings. The village of Tyburn, literally meaning boundary stream, was about to rebrand itself so thoroughly that the name would almost vanish from the map. By the 15th century, residents were tired of the association with the gallows. Around 1400, the parish church moved to a new site besides the stream and was dedicated to St. Mary. The hamlet began calling itself St. Mary at the Bourne, Mary's Church by the stream. Over time, that contracted through several mutations, St. Mary le Bourne, Mary le Bone, until it became the Marylebone we know today. Even Tyburn Road got an upgrade, becoming Oxford Street. When Tyburn Lane became Park Lane, the makeover was complete. The transformation from fields to city was driven by two aristocratic estates. To the east of Baker Street, the Portland estate, later the Howard de Walden estate. It began developing from 1719, laying out a rational grid centered on Cavendish Square. Harley Street, Wimpole Street, Portland Place, the names still echo the family connections. To the west, the Portman estate, founded on land acquired by Sir William Portman in 1554. It started issuing building leases in the 1750s. William Baker laid Baker Street. Henry William Portman created Portman Square. By 1820, the development was largely complete. A grid of elegant Georgian terraces, squares, and mews houses where muddy fields and cattle routes had been just decades before. Grids are meant to be orderly, but one lane in Marylebone, it stubbornly refused to comply. Act 3, The Pub That Babbage Built Next To. Our first pub stop is the Barley Mow at 8 Dorset Street, W1U 6QW. Built in 1791, it's the oldest surviving pub in Marylebone and one of the last remaining free houses in central London. That means it isn't tied to any brewery and it can serve wherever it pleases. The building itself is Grade 2 star listed. The interior is worth the extra star rating. original matchboard paneling from the late 18th century, and, most remarkably, a pair of late Victorian wooden drinking booths attached to the bar. These tiny compartments, surrounded by 5-foot-high wooden screens, were once commonplace in London pubs. Useful if you were a gentleman who didn't want to be seen, or a working man who didn't want to be bothered. Today, they're an exceptionally rare survival. Get there early if you want to bag one. Dorset Street was laid out on land leased from the Portman estate, with building leases commencing in 1789. The pub's first publican was James Jacobs, opening for business around 1793 and staying for about 5 years before moving down the street to another pub. That pattern of landlords rotating between pubs was typical of the era. Publicans were mobile entrepreneurs. Moving up or sideways was the name of the game. Next door at number 1 Dorset Street from 1829 until his death in 1871 lived Charles Babbage, the man often called the father of computing. Babbage invented the difference engine and conceived the analytical engine, the theoretical ancestor of every computer you've ever used. His chief complaint about living in Marylebone was the noise. Babbage calculated that street music and traffic reduced his working capacity by 25%. He campaigned relentlessly against organ grinders, brass bands, and what he called the instruments of torture permitted by the government to be played in the streets. I wonder what he would have made of the leap in logic from his early computer to the chips that power the speakers on our mobile devices. Babbage's fury about noise tells us Marylebone in the mid-19th century was no longer a quiet village. The elegant Georgian squares were filling up with prosperous professionals, but the streets also teemed with tradesmen, servants, and hawkers. The 1841 census shows the Barley Mow surrounded by a population of butlers, cowkeepers, carpenters, and painters, the working infrastructure that kept polite society running. Where did many of these people end up? Let's stroll to a fine park and find out. Act 4. The Garden of Bones. A short walk from the Barley Mow brings us to one of the most deceptively peaceful spots in London. Paddington Street Gardens is a manufactured green space with plain trees, benches, a hexagonal gazebo, and a charming statue of a boy polishing his shoe. Mothers push prams, office workers eat sandwiches. It's delightful. Except it sits on top of approximately 80,000 to 110,000 dead bodies. This was St. George's burial ground, opened in 1733 after the Marylebone Parish churchyard became overcrowded. The land was donated by Edward Harley, Earl of Oxford. His name lives on both in Harley Street and Oxford Street. Burials here continued until around 1814, with interments reaching a staggering depth of 14 meters across the site. Many are in brick vaults that extend under Paddington Street itself. The southern end of the gardens contains the remains of thousands of paupers, along with former residents of the parish workhouse, a grim institution built on the site in 1752. Florence Nightingale once visited and was reportedly horrified by the conditions. Children received minimal education, with evidence suggesting that illegal flogging occurred. The poor of Marylebone lived and died in the shadow of some of London's most elegant streets, and many of them ended up here, stacked 14 meters deep. All of which brings us to body snatchers. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the boom in demand for cadavers at London's medical schools created a thriving and ghoulish black market. The only legal source of bodies for dissection was executed criminals. There simply weren't enough of them, so gangs of resurrection men, a polite term for body snatchers, they prowled London's burial grounds by night, digging up the freshly interred and selling them to anatomy schools for as much as 10 guineas a corpse. Paddington Street Gardens was prime sourcing for the resurrection men. Many burial plots here incorporated ingenious man-traps to deter body snatchers, iron cages over coffins, heavy stone slabs, spring-loaded devices designed to injure anyone who disturbed the earth. Wealthy families would hire night watchmen to guard fresh graves. The resurrection men operated in gangs, often out of pubs. They congregated in alehouses near the hospitals they supplied, around Smithfield for St. Bartholomew's, around Borough for Guy's and St. Thomas's. One notorious pub, the Fortune of War in Smithfield, was officially designated as a place for the reception of drowned persons, a convenient cover for the bodies that passed through its doors. The most infamous London gang, led by John Bishop, operated for 12 years and snatched an estimated 1,000 bodies from churchyards across the city. It was eventually a murder that ended the trade, when Bishop and his accomplices, the so-called London Burkers, inspired by Edinburgh's Burke and Hare, when they were caught trying to sell the body of a 14-year-old boy whose corpse showed no signs of having been buried, the public outcry was enormous. The resulting Anatomy Act of 1832 allowed surgeons to dissect unclaimed bodies from workhouses and hospitals, effectively ending the body snatching trade, though at the cost of disproportionately penalizing the poor, whose bodies now became the raw material of medical progress. In 1886, the burial ground was transformed into a public park, designed by Fanny Wilkinson, the UK's first female professional landscape gardener, and opened by Princess Louise, daughter of Queen Victoria. The headstones were removed. The Grade II listed Fitzpatrick Mausoleum of 1759 still stands in the South Garden, an elegant Georgian monument to a woman who died at 30. In 2012, 1,200 bodies were exhumed to make way for new luxury apartments. Marylebone, where the dead make room for the living. You won't see that in any real estate sales brochure. Act 5. The river beneath the lane. At this point, cross Marylebone Road and look south. Ahead of you stretches Marylebone Lane. Something immediately looks off. Where every other road runs straight and true, Marylebone Lane wobbles and curves like a walk to the loo after a few pints. That's because Marylebone Lane doesn't follow Georgian town planning. It follows the River Tyburn. The lane traces the original left bank of the stream as it meandered south, through the village towards Oxford Street and beyond. When the developers arrived in the 18th century and laid their grids over the fields, the lane was already there, an ancient path worn by centuries of feet walking beside the water. The grid was built around it, not through it. The Tyburn rises from springs on the slopes of Hampstead. It flows south through Swiss Cottage, passes through Regent's Park, where it once fed the boating lake, and then enters its underground existence beneath Baker Street. At Baker Street Underground Station, the Metropolitan Railway opened in 1863. It had to build a bridge structure inside the tunnel to carry the river's sewer overhead. The Tyburn still flows there, now known prosaically as the King's Scholars Pond Sewer. It passes under Buckingham Palace before splitting into channels and reaching the Thames near Vauxhall Bridge. On Marylebone Lane, there's a small plaque built into a wall dating the construction of a city water conduit to 1776. One of the few visible traces that a river once ran through here. The name Marylebone, of course, is the river's legacy, St. Mary by the Bourne, the church on the stream. Once you see the street layout, you can't ignore it. The river is written into the street plan. Sometimes early morning before traffic builds, locals say you can actually hear the Tyburn running beneath the pavement at either end of the lane. A stained glass window sits partway along Marylebone Lane, commissioned in 2000. It portrays the river flowing beneath the street. After all this talk of gallows and body snatching, there's only one thing to be done. A good old-fashioned pub knees up, a sing-along with the old Joanna. Act 6. 4 pubs, 4 stories. Marylebone Lane has some of the best surviving historic pubs in central London, each a window into a different chapter of this neighborhood's story. Tucked around a corner just off Marylebone Lane, the King's Head at 13 Westmoreland Street, W1G 8PJ, is a proper back street local. First licensed in 1765, the current building dates from 1939, when it was rebuilt by Charrington's Brewery. That 1939 interior survives largely intact, earning the pub a place on camera's national inventory of historic pub interiors. The dado paneling, the elegant tiled bar plinth, the traces of a glazed partition that once divided the ground floor into two separate bars, public bar on one side, saloon on the other. Until the 20th century, most pubs had multiple bars separated by screens and partitions. The public bar was for working men. The saloon, with its carpets and slightly higher prices, was for the professional classes. Women, when permitted, typically drank in the saloon or a separate snug. The King's Head part-preserved partition is a physical record of that class geography, frozen in place since 1939. The pub once hosted its own piano sing-alongs, part of a Marylebone tradition of pub music that persisted right up until the late 1990s. At the southern end of Marylebone Lane, at Thayer Street, stands one of the area's most beautiful pubs, hiding behind one of its plainest facades. The Angel in the Fields at 37 Thayer Street, W1U2QY, was first recorded in 1720 and rebuilt in 1770 as the surrounding area was developed. The In the Fields addition to its name came during a 2001 refurbishment. It's appropriate because in 1720, this really was fields. John Roke's 1746 map of London shows the pub sitting on the edge of open countryside, with ponds visible in the area directly opposite. Step inside and you'll find warm wood paneling, striking stained glass windows, and the total absence of piped music. This is a Samuel Smith's pub, controversial to many, but I love their attitude towards stewardship of heritage pubs. It also means good beer, no-nonsense strict adherence to the Yorkshire Brewery's famously eccentric rules. No mobile phones, no laptops, no TVs, and, allegedly, no swearing near the bar staff. The Angel is the antithesis of the boutique trend that dominates Marylebone High Street around the corner. A former barman revealed that old menus from the pub's time, as a Burney Inn, complete with prawn cocktails, were found in the cellar. The 70s are never far away in an old London pub. I remember them well. I can't look at a prawn to this day, although I am still partial to a Black Forest gatto where I can find one. If there's a single pub that embodies the soul of Marylebone, it's the Golden Eagle at 59 Marylebone Lane, W1U2NY. The corner of Marylebone Lane and Bulstrode Street. It's built on a former bank of the River Tyburn. The pub was first licensed in 1842, then rebuilt in 1890. One account suggests it was originally a tailor's shop, and the owner got a liquor license so he could serve customers drinks while they waited for their clothes. It's been a pub ever since. Run by Gina Vernon and her family, her son Jack was born above the pub in 1995 and is now a partner in the business. It's a free house, so no brewery ties, independently owned, and that means they choose their own ales. There's no food menu, no screens screaming sports at you, no Wi-Fi password pinned above the bar. This pub has been described as the heart of Marylebone. Come on a Tuesday, Thursday, or Friday evening from about 8:30, and you'll find Tony Fingers Pearson at the upright piano. He's been playing in this pub since 1988. Music hall standards from the 20s and 30s through to modern stuff. And the room sings along in a full-throated, pint-in-hand, arm-around-a-stranger sing-along. Pub sing-alongs were common across Marylebone right up until the late 1990s. According to Tony, the Golden Eagle is the last one standing. People walk past on Marylebone Lane, hear the piano through the door, and stick their heads in. Gina sums up this perfect pub nicely. We just serve ales and play music, and people keep coming. Our final stop is the Coachmaker's Arms at 8 Marylebone Lane, W1U2PZ, the corner of Marylebone Lane and Bentonick Street. The Coachmaker's Arms takes its name from the Victorian craftsmen who built and repaired coaches in the surrounding mews and workshops. It's been a pub since at least 1794, when the publican William Hanson was first recorded here. The current building is a later Victorian construction, built like the Golden Eagle on the banks of the buried River Tyburn. The pub has endured several name changes. It was the O'Connor Dawn when it became an Irish pub, then rebranded as the Conduit of Tyburn before reverting to its original Victorian name after a refurbishment. Today it's run by the Cubitt House Group as a 3-floor gastropub, a bustling ground-floor pub, a chop house-inspired dining room upstairs, and a basement speakeasy cocktail bar called the Clubhouse, built at roughly the depth where the Tyburn once flowed. The Coachmaker's Arms represents modern Marylebone, polished, curated, confident in its heritage. The Conduit of Tyburn name was clever marketing, but the Coachmaker's name tells us the real story of the working economy that existed alongside the grand squares and elegant terraces. Artisan workshops and skilled trades. Aristocrats, servants, coachmakers, cowkeepers, carpenters, publicans, and piano players all left a mark. You must know where to look, or, as we see next, where to stand. Act 7. Now you can look up. Our short 2-mile walk covered a lot of historical ground. We started at that marble arch traffic island, where I told you to look down for a small plaque marking former gallows. Then, as we learned, walking Marble Arch through the heart of Marylebone, you can pave over an execution spot, bury a river, lay a grid of streets over open fields, yet reminders remain, even without plaques. As you stand on Marylebone Lane, consider that today you're the top layer of history. At the bottom, London clay deposited millions of years ago. Above that, the gravel bed through which the Tyburn once flowed, carrying snowmelt from Hampstead toward the Thames. Then centuries of medieval trackway worn by feet following the stream to the village of Tyburn. Above that, Georgian paving that covered the stream and transformed a river path into a city lane. Above everything, 21st century Marylebone, with its boutiques and brunch spots and Harley Street consultants. A handful of pubs survive with their patrons' stories. The Barley Mow, built before the French Revolution, still serving pints in wooden booths that would have been familiar to Charles Babbage's servants next door. The King's Head, its 1939 interior, a time capsule of pre-war pub design. The Angel in the Fields, named for a landscape that vanished before the ink was dry on its first license. The Golden Eagle, where Tony's been at that piano longer than some listeners have been alive. The Coachmaker's Arms, built over a buried river, named for a trade that no longer exists, reinvented for a neighborhood that keeps reinventing itself. From gallows to gastropub, from a plaque nobody notices to a piano everybody hears. That's our walk today. Your guidebook would have sent you to Madame Tussauds and the Sherlock Holmes Museum. We decoded Marylebone the publicity way, through its pubs, its buried river, its body snatchers, and its bones. I'm Expat Andy. You've been listening to Publicity, the Travel Guidebook Gap. Travel the way it could be. Thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, and share our episodes. Help support British tourism and the Great British Pub.